Hi there, it's Dr. Bernstein, and in this video I'm going to show you how knowing about stanza, visual design, and techniques like enjambment can help you arrive at a deeper understanding of particular poems. I have to be honest with you, even though I'm a literary scholar who earned a PhD from a highly respected university, I still sometimes feel intimidated by poetry. In general, I feel more comfortable with other types of literature. And I know that my students also often feel overwhelmed by the idea of studying poetry. Even though we all know how to read English, it can still sometimes feel as though we're encountering a foreign language when it comes to uh, studying poetry. So my goal in this part of the course is to provide you with some strategies that will make you feel less overwhelmed and at the same time get you doing more than just reading the words on the page. These techniques will assist you in analyzing the poems. So the first thing that I want to tell you about relates to how lines of poetry are organized. So let's hop on over to the Poetry Archive, which provides a pretty useful definition of what constitutes a stanza. And what I want to draw your attention to is these first couple of lines here. And you should write this down. In order to write a powerful first essay, you're going to need to make use of a wide range of the things you're learning in this unit. So I highly recommend that you take notes while watching this video. Feel free to pause the video if you need a little extra time to jot down what I'm saying or to write down what's on the screen. If you take notes now, you'll have an advantage when it comes time to write your essay. What's that advantage? Well, you can just look over your notes to get some ideas and quotes to use. You won't run the risk of forgetting we covered this material in the first place, or having to waste time by going back to rewatch the video just to get basic details. So it might seem like it will take you more time to take notes, but actually it will save you time in the long run. So links to all of the sites that I'm going to pull up in this video will be available on our checklist. So what I want you to do right now, as I said before, is pay attention to the first part of this definition. A stanza is a group of lines within a poem. The blank line between stanzas is known as a stanza break. So what's most important right here is that the stanza is the group of lines within a poem. There are names for certain types of stanzas of certain lengths, and this will be important when we're studying the sonnets. So what you should pay attention to are that 2-line stanzas are called couplets and 4-line stanzas are called quatrains. For right now, let's just focus on the basic fact that the term stanza refers to the way a group of lines appear in a poem. Sometimes the structure of the stanza is significant to the meaning of the poem. Sometimes it's not. I found the following technique really helpful, and this is something you should write down even though it's not on the screen. Before you even start reading a poem, take a look at the shape of the stanzas and see if there's anything unusual about them. If there is, take a moment to ask yourself what's unusual about them, or even just, spend a few moments to think about what you notice about the way the stanzas are shaped. It's highly likely that you won't understand the potential significance of the stanza design until you've read the poem at least once or twice, but it can make it easier to start thinking critically about the poem. That is, you'll go into the poem with a mission, maybe to figure out why the stanzas are arranged in the way that they are. So let me walk you through this process, and we'll take a moment to look at a poem called Prayer Before Birth, which Poetry Archive mentions. So what do you notice? These are the stanzas: stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, stanza 4, stanza 5, 6, 7, I believe there's an eighth. So you might, first thing you might notice, just before you even read the poem at all, it's like, this seems a little bit unusual. Each stanza is of a different length, and they seem, in general, each one seems to be getting longer and longer, and they seem to be shaped almost like a funnel, or at least some of them are. So if I were to be assigned this poem to read, that's one of the first things I'd notice is, there's something. The stanzas are of varying lengths. They seem to get longer as the poem goes on, and they sort of are shaped almost like a funnel. So I wonder why that's the case. So you can see, just by not before you even get into the poem, just having that in mind helps you go into the poem with something to think about. So the first thing I'm going to notice, and this is important, pay attention to titles. Sometimes titles can give you a clue to what the poem is about. So we know that this is a prayer before birth. Then the first line of the poem tells us that the poem is being told from the speaker of the poem is the unborn fetus. That's a little bit unusual, strange, but hey, I'll explore it. And what I notice right away is, if this is a prayer, I'm sort of looking to things related to prayer. So this fetus is asking to be heard, to be consoled, to be provided, to be forgiven, to be rehearsed, to be heard, to be filled. I don't really know what to make of that, but those are the fetus's requests and petitions. And there's also something really bleak, a really depressing cast to this poem that we get right from the beginning. Let not the blood-sucking bat or the rat or the stoat or the club-footed ghoul come near me. So there's something dark about this poem. And what we see over the course of the poem, which you don't have to read right now, is that the fetus's concerns seem to be multiplying, to be increasing. So, the fetus's concerns and fears are multiplying and increasing. Isn't that interesting? The stanzas are getting longer and longer. So maybe the poet is using the visual design of the poem to reflect these growing concerns and requests. That is, the poet is not just having the fetus say these things, the poet is using the form of his poem to help show how these concerns are growing and growing. So I hope you can see how just becoming aware of stanza design can help you begin thinking critically about poems. As I said before, stanzas are part of the structural and visual design of a poem. And for some poets, the visual design of the poem is really important, an important component of their work. And I just want to show you, this is a poem by George Herbert, who is a 17th century poet, and he writes a poem called The Altar. And what you'll notice is that the form of his poem assumes the form of an altar. So if you were studying this poem, you could ask yourself if if the poet was using the design as a mere gimmick, or if he was trying to make a more significant point by making the shape of his words conform to the design of the thing he was describing. So now that we've looked at these two poems that we're not studying this semester, let us take a look at Spiro Wagner's poem, How to Read a Poem, Beginner's Manual. If you go into this poem, the first thing you might notice is that the stanzas are fairly irregular. There's no discernible pattern in terms of how they're shaped or what their length is. So that's something you could think about. I wonder if the irregularity of the stanzas has anything to do with what she's saying about introducing people to poetry, or does it sort of seem to connect to the point she's making about poetry? If so, how? So I'm not going to give this away for you. I think you should think about these questions and try to come up with some answers of your own about why the stanzas might be designed the way they are. There's just one stanza that I want to call your attention to right now, and it's this third stanza. To read poetry requires only courage, enough to leap from the edge and trust. So here I think it's interesting. This is sort of the ledge. The first line of the stanza is like a ledge, and then we have to sort of jump off the edge here. So maybe she's using the design of her stanza to support her point about the edge, the ledge, jumping off, leaping. Now, while we're here looking at her poem, I also want to tell you about enjambment. I'm going to pull up a definition that I want you to write down. So as Merriam-Webster's online dictionary informs us, enjambment is the running over of a sentence from one verse or couplet into another so that closely related words fall in different lines. That is, with enjambment, the thought being expressed in the line isn't completed and it gets carried over into the next one. Sometimes enjambment can be used to delay the intention of the line, the meaning of the line, until the following line, and thus play on the expectation of the reader. So take a moment to write down this definition and pause the video if you need to. Now, there are a number of places where Spiro Wagner uses enjambment. I'm just going to call your attention to one of them, and it's in the next stanza. Treat a poem like dirt. When you read that line, I mean, when we hear treat someone or something like dirt, it usually means to treat them poorly, to treat them with a lack of respect. So she's sort of setting up this expectation here, and the previous part of the poem might lead you to believe that that's something she actually might mean. But then that thought doesn't get completed in that line. Treat a poem like dirt. Humus rich and heavy from the garden. Later it will become the fat tomatoes and golden squash piled high upon your kitchen table. So the enjambment is in from line 1 to line 2. And this is where you want to look up words. You could even Google this word. But the humus is a special type of dirt, and in fact, it sort of has this reputation of the life force of soil. It's the best type of soil. It's the most productive, nutritious, rich, dense, life-giving part of the soil. So the expectation that gets set up in this first line is to treat the poem like dirt, to treat it poorly. But the completion of the thought suggests something else, and that is to treat it as something that is incredibly rich and luxuriant and life-giving. So what I would like you to do is to take a few minutes and think about how other examples of enjambment work in this poem. And that's it for this video. If you have any questions, of course, go over to our discussion board, and there'll be a link for you to post any questions you might have or responses you might have to this video.